It's a great pleasure to be with you. I wish you a Shavua Tov. You're quite correct. We are tomorrow here, Sunday. It's actually already afternoon. And because we're so well ahead of you, we'll be honored to be able to announce to you when Moshiach comes, so you'll be able to get ready for it. We're going to spend a little time together. The theme that we're going to talk about is ostensibly anger. But I want to consider the totality of how we respond to adversity. How do we actually confront circumstances that trouble us and worry us? And all of us are living at a point in history where we are indeed quite stressed and worried and concerned. So I'm going to divide the session into 3 parts. The first part, I'm going to look at the nature of the human being. After all, anger is an emotion, and I'm going to consider with you, what is an emotion? What role does mind play? What is the nature of consciousness? And therefore, we'll be able to have at least a handle as to what anger is and what strategies we can adduce in order to be able to overcome it. My second part of the session will be to provide a tool that you can utilize to create self-change in order to be able to not practice anger and to help those around you who might be angry people. I'm going to use the tool of meditation, and I'm going to take you through a few exercises there, and I'll speak about that when we get to that section. And then in the third part of our session together, which is my favorite part, we're going to talk together. I'm going to invite you to share yourself with me, ask questions, comment, correct me where I got it wrong, and I want to be able to learn from you at the same time. So let's make a beginning. The beginning is, who are we? Who am I? Let me begin this way. 5 seconds before a person dies, we should all live bis 120 to 120 years of age, but 5 seconds before a person dies, their ears hear perfectly. Let's assume that. 5 seconds after they die, the ears stop hearing. Why? And you'll say, but that's rather obvious. The person is dead. But what does that mean, dead? It's just the word. The ears haven't yet decomposed in any sense 5 seconds after death. The machinery is completely intact. Why has the person stopped hearing? So we have to conclude that there's some missing element. And we call that missing element an energy, a force. This evening, I'm going to call it neshama, loosely translated as soul. But if you prefer to see it in abstract terms like a spiritual energy, that's fine. Therefore, it's a bit like plugging our machinery into the power point. You may want to have toast, but unless you connect the toaster to the power, it's not going to work. And therefore, death means that somehow the power's been unplugged. The toaster is still perfect, but it's not plugged in. We stop hearing. Same with the eyes. The eyes are a wonderful piece of biological machinery. Machinery, though. And without the connection through the force, the energy, they'll stop seeing. The brain, likewise. The brain is not mystical. The brain is not magical. It is also complex biological machinery. And if it too doesn't have connection to the power source, it stops functioning. The human being, you and I, experience the consciousness of the energy flowing through the ear as a phenomenon we call hearing. We experience that energy flowing through the eye as seeing. We experience the flow of the energy through the machinery of brain as mind. Now, the English language is a rather complex language with many antecedents, Celtic, Anglo-Saxon, Romance languages, and others. So there are other words also like intelligence or intellect or thought. But that's our experience. When the neshama flows through the guf, through the whole body, our total experience of that is consciousness. So that's what consciousness is. It's the way we read the neshama flowing through the body. Question: can I, in some shape or form, control the flow of consciousness? Well, let's see if that's possible. When we talk about the neshama, we're talking about an energy force that initially distributes in two general ways. One way we call mind, seichel, and the other way we call midos, emotion. You and I are the product of two directions of flow, mind and emotion. In Western psychology, they tend to merge the two together. But in our psycho-spiritual teachings, we're much more exact. Mind flow is something separate from emotion flow. Coming back to our topic, anger. Where does anger fall? Is it a product of mind, or is it a product of emotion? Now, some of you will hedge your bets and say it's both, and you'll be correct in some way. We learn a very interesting piece of insight through our Jewish spiritual teachings. In Sefer Tanya, the major work by the Alter Rebbe, and I'm sure some of you have tapped into it. You have such wonderful rabbis and rebbitzins there who have studied it, and you should be able to consult them and study it with them. The Alter Rebbe says there a very, very important teaching, namely, Moyach shalit al halev, that the mind determines the outcomes of the emotions. Listen carefully. The mind determines the outcomes of the emotions, which means there's a sequence here. The suggestion is mind comes first, emotions come second. Now, some of you will perhaps say, but that's not my experience. I know people who are purely emotional, or I sometimes respond with my heart or with my gut, as colloquially it's often described. So I'm going to tell you that's not so. You cannot have an emotion without first there being an interpretation of the mind. Again, you cannot have an emotion without there first being an interpretation of the mind. Otherwise, why should the emotion flow this way rather than that way? There must be some initial direction, compass bearing of the mind. Now, it's true that very often that moment of compass bearing, setting a direction by the mind, is so short, a microsecond, that it doesn't even become apparent to you. And therefore, you tend to say, oh, I'm acting emotionally. But let me assure you, and it's usually because of the force of habit, regilus, repeating something over and over again, that the emotion flows with the minutest input of mind. Now, that's not wise. Wisdom means that you give the mind sufficient time to be able to create an accurate compass bearing for the mind, for the emotion. Otherwise, the emotions are not intelligent, or the field which is today called emotional intelligence, which is basically moyach shalit al halev. Let's go to anger. Anger must begin with a moment of interpretation. Either you're reading the provocation in a certain way, otherwise you won't have that emotion, or you're misreading a provocation in some way. Either way, the result of that reading can create an emotion. If you are a wise, understanding individual in the moment, then your response won't be anger. for reasons that I'll explain shortly. You'll be able to be a more understanding, compassionate individual with a greater sense of empathy. You'll interpret the supposed provocation differently, resulting in a different emotion. However, if within there is insecurity, if within there is fear, then sometimes the unwise reading is, I have to defend myself. And the way I defend myself is to try to control you. So here's my first definition. Anger is an attempt to control or dominate the other or the environment in order to alleviate our inner fears and insecurities. Again, anger is my way to force you to conform to my wishes, because if you do what I want you to do, then I'll be happy. Anger is purely ego-driven. It's purely self-centered. It's all about me, I, which we call in Hasidus Yeshus. It's all about me. There are no redeeming virtues of anger under any circumstances whatsoever. Now that's a very big statement. And usually when I say that there's no redeeming virtues of anger, my audience immediately gets angry with me. How can you possibly say something so ridiculous? Isn't anger a natural emotion? No, it's not. What do you mean it's not? Aren't we born with anger and the capacity for anger? There's a difference between anger and the capacity for anger. No, we're not born with anger. We are born with the freedom of choice of responding to circumstances the way we choose, or, unfortunately, the way we become habituated and remove ourselves the freedom of choice by simply being lazy and acting habitually. Again, if I'm being provoked, I don't have to respond with anger. Choice. So now let me segue to another part of my discussion, and I'll come back. How does Bechira Chofshis, free choice, operate? I'm free to choose, of course, within limits. You can't be free to fly through the air like a bird. What we're saying is our freedom of choice, the way that Viktor Frankl indicates in his wonderful book, and the way that many other positive psychologists in behavioral schools speak about, is my freedom to respond with my mind. I have the freedom to respond with my mind. No, I can't fly like a bird. I don't have the machinery for that. But I can respond to everything through my interpretation. So that Viktor Frankl, in his 4 years in Auschwitz, says in his book, which he writes, Man's Search for Meaning Afterwards, that I had the choice to respond to the oppressions of the Nazis by being completely overcome by it and suffering, which I did physically, but I chose not to suffer with my mind and therefore not with my heart. I have the freedom here. I won't go into that because that's a very deep and difficult arena in its own right. I want to be speaking about the ordinary circumstances of life. I'm not going to talk about extraordinary circumstances, ordinary circumstances. So let me begin this way. You know that energy force we call the neshama, the soul? Well, when it enters into our being, and by the way, do you know when it becomes, when we are ensouled? At the moment of conception. Believe it or not, at that moment of conception, you and I imitate God. It's the singular moment that you and I have the capacity to imitate God. We can create. There's no other circumstance. Everything else we do in life is not creation. Everything else we do in life is taking one format and transforming it into another format. Taking some material and making it into another composite material. taking some basis in chemistry and reorganizing it to create another product in chemistry, whatever it is. The only time we create is the moment of conception. At that moment, there is an ensoulment. And as the one cell multiplies and grows, the body becomes more attuned to be able to allow the flow to flow through it, which it does upon birth. So at that moment, the soul enters the being. Now, there's something very interesting. You know, God has a sense of humor. God made that energy flow through us in two strands, two ways. One strand we call the nefesh bahamis, the animalistic strand. And the other strand we call the nefesh elokis, the godly strand. Let's stay there for a moment. The animalistic strand. Now, we're not putting down animals. Animals are a wonderful feature of Hashem's creation, amazing. But animals are limited by design, and they're driven by their instinctive drives. The human being has the capacity beyond instinct. We have the capacity to be able to create value systems, to be aware and conscious of ourselves in the flow of time, present, past, and future, and therefore have hopes and aspirations. And that's because our design is different. But an animal tends to be instinctive in its drive. We also possess that animalistic capacity. What are our instinctive drives? As Abraham Maslow postulated, food, clothing, shelter, leading to self-actualization. Food, clothing, and shelter, the essentials, and they're very useful. We can't live without them. So the animalistic self does us a great service. It makes sure that we have a drive for food, clothing, and shelter. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is our animalistic side doesn't know when to stop. How much food? How much clothing? How much shelter? Food? I won't eat it unless it's haute cuisine, unless it's master chef designed. Clothing? Unless it's designer label, not for me. And I have to have at least 20 outfits because there may be one day that I might need one and not have it. I have to have a mansion like Gone with the Wind, with the pillars in front and a chandelier in every room, including the toilet. In other words, the animalistic side, the nefesh bahamis, just doesn't know when to stop. Yes, it does a service of self-maintenance, but it's self-oriented constantly, more. In other words, it's to do with the ego. The animalistic self is self-centered. It's egotistic in that way. Comes along the other side of self, which Hashem invested us with, the nefesh elokis. And the nefesh elokis is altruistic. The nefesh elokis is telling us that you have to be able to be natural in sharing with the world. Give, contribute. And that side of self is the true self. And I can prove it to you. Think back to a moment when you were extremely happy in your life. A moment, as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, now. If you can recall one such moment, I have no doubt that that moment was one where you were sharing and giving with a loved one. In other words, we are basically, our dominant self is the opposite of Yeshus, the opposite of ego. Now, coming back to my point, these two strands conflict. One part of me says, I've got to look after myself, and I'm insecure. I don't know what's enough. Here we are, we're living coronavirus, the economies are falling apart. I have to make sure that I'm all for myself. Comes along another part of me and says, no, that's not life. That's not the meaning of life. The meaning of life is you share. My piece of bread is yours. And these come into constant conflict. Anger is a product. You aren't born with anger. Anger is a product of that conflict, but the lower self wins. Anger is all about me, I, the Nefesh Bahamis. I want you to do what I want you to do. And we raise our voice threateningly. We accuse and we try to make sure that we can control the situation without realizing that we control nothing in life. You control absolutely nothing in life except yourself. That's the only thing we can control. Anger is a product of a poor choice. That conflict within provides us with bechira chavshis, free choice. I can make sure that my higher self rules, or I can unfortunately give in and allow my lower self to rule. Anger is when I lose. I'm not born with anger. Anger is a choice. And I choose badly when I express anger. In fact, this is documented in our Jewish teachings, not just through Hasidus like I've been telling you, but it's actually part of halacha, Jewish law, no less than by a personage by the name of Maimonides, the Rambam, who writes in his classic work, Mishneh Torah, sometimes just referred to as the Rambam or Yad Chazaka. And I'm going to quote to you directly what he says, compiling all the teachings of the Talmud into law, as follows. He says, so too, anger is an exceedingly bad quality, one from which it is proper to distance oneself to the extreme. A person should train himself or herself not to be angry, even for a matter where anger might appear to be appropriate. Now, if a person wants to instill awe in his children, A-W-E, awe in his children, then he should pretend to be angry. But his mind should be composed completely within. He should act only as if he's impersonating anger. The early sages said, whoever is angry is as if he practices avodah zarah, idol worship. He said, whoever is angry, if he's a scholar, his wisdom will depart from him, and if he's a prophet, his prophetic spirit will depart from him. If you want to look at that, it's in Hilchos Deis in the 2nd chapter. So there's no question that anger is forbidden. And I'm going to repeat that seemingly outrageous statement. Anger is wrong under every set of circumstances, every time. And the Rambam has just supported that tenet. Okay, having said that, of course, the question is, well, how do I train not to be angry? Because anger is a habit. Like all things in life is a habit. What is a habit? A habit is something that's repeated until it becomes a pattern. Today, with the advance of science and technology, we can actually recognize and see this on screen, on a computer, when people are hooked up, so we can actually observe visually what's happening in their brain. When you have a thought, there's a neurotransmitting pathway that's set down between one nerve end fiber to another nerve end fiber. Now, I'm being very simplistic, but basically this is correct. A thought consists of a pathway of flow of neurotransmitters from one source to another. If I repeat that again, I deepen the groove, making it more likely that it will happen again. And the more and more I do it, the more and more I practice it, the more likely it will be. Therefore, all those psychologists for the past 3 generations who have said it's important to express anger, get it out there, say it as it is, have been completely wrong. No, you don't have to get rid of anger. Quite the contrary. Every time you try to get rid of anger by expressing it, you are, in effect, making a deeper groove in that neurotransmitting pathway, making it more likely that you'll be angry again, not less likely. You're not getting rid of anything. You're just practicing something. It's a bit like learning a piano. To learn a piano, how do you learn? You repeat the scales over and over again, so that ultimately the fingers are able to express the mind with greater dexterity. Or you're creating that connection between the nerve end fibers that connect the brain to the fingers, and you're practicing them so it becomes better and better. So you can be better and better at being angry. You can be more and more angry. You're better at it because you've practiced it. So how do you get rid of it? The answer is, if I speak equally scientifically according to what we know today, I have to abandon that pathway of the neurotransmitters and set down a new pathway. How do I do that? I have to practice a different interpretation of the moment. I have to repeat positive responses, benevolently, compassionately, empathically. And I'm going to give you a methodology. It's a 3-step methodology. I'm going to give you 3 steps now on how to undo anger. And then I'm going to teach you a meditative practice to be able to practice it like you actually practice the piano. Step number 1 is to become aware that you're getting angry. Now, you might say that's obvious. It's not obvious. We catch ourselves when it's too late, when the damage is done. Every one of us has an idiosyncratic set of signals that we can learn about at the beginning of anger, whether it's a tightening of the eyes into narrower format, whether it's the forehead becoming lined, whether it's a stomach sensation, whether it's a tightening of the chest, whether it's the fists becoming clenched. Every one of us has different kinds of signals, or a combination of signals. You have to learn from observing yourself. What are your beginning points? I'm getting angry. Step number 1. That, by the way, is a half-day seminar just in its own right. Now, step number 2. Step number 2 is to ask a question in your mind. That's with mind, interpretation. You have to ask a question in the mind. And here it is. What is it that's causing the other person to say or do what they're saying or doing? That's it. Again, you have to ask yourself a question. What is it that's causing the other person to say or do what they're saying or doing? And no, you don't need to get an answer. In fact, you can't get an answer. You never know what's going on really in someone else's mind and heart. It's the asking of the question that's important. You asking yourself the question is an important part of the process of transforming from anger. Why? Because by asking the question, you're disengaging your emotions and engaging your mind. You're giving yourself, you're giving the seichel an opportunity to reinterpret. When you engage your mind, you're not engaged with emotions. If you go straight into anger, you're straight into emotions. You have to, and I said before, you've got to have the capacity of the mind to give a positive compass bearing to the emotions. By asking the question, you're creating that pause that refreshes, that pause that allows you the opportunity to be able to, what is it that's causing the other person? What are you really doing? I'll tell you what you're really doing. You're shifting from yeshus, me, I, ego, to you? What is it that's causing you, the other person, to say or do what you're saying or doing? You're moving from self to other. When you move from self to other, you're engaging the nefesh elokis at the expense of the nefesh bahamis, the higher order self rather than the lower order self. And step 3, you make sure that the feelings respond to your questioning. When I'm asking what's causing the other person, I'm concerned about you. You're yelling at me, you're screaming at me. That means you have the problem, not me. But I do so compassionately. I wonder what's causing you the pain. No one yells and screams unless there's some level of pain, emotional pain, physical pain, whatever it might be. I'm being compassionate. I'm practicing chesed. I'm practicing ahava. I'm practicing my concern about you, my loving kindness of you. The opposite of what underlies anger, which is simply egotism. Okay? So that's as much theory as I want to adduce with you at the moment in this session. I want to now look at, well, how do I practice this? How do I make it happen as a reality? It's all very nice, Laibl, what you've told me. Yes, fine, I'm hearing what you say, but how do I actually do it? Well, the 3 steps is how you do it. But you need to also, in terms of life, create within yourself an ease to make that happen. And the first step is you have to create a level playing field. You have to disengage from being a person who is negatively sensitized to provocation. You have to create those moments of inner peace and practice them over and over again so there's a level playing field. Because if you're a habitually angry person, then you're always going to be a habitually angry person. So let's create first a level playing field. And we do that by creating a sense of inner balance, very often by focusing on something, like breathing. There are many systems that practice breathing as a way of focusing. I'm going to do that also. And I'm going to do it because in our tradition, breath is something more profound. What's the Hebrew word for breath? Neshima. What's the Hebrew word for soul? Neshama. In other words, breath and soul are very closely related. In fact, breath is the first level of expression of the soul through the body. Breath reveals, your breathing reveals your state of mind and your state of heart. In fact, it occurs to me, do you remember in Shemos, in the Chumash, in the Bible, in the Parsha Shemos, 2 elderly gentlemen wander in from the desert. They come up to a group of people and say, we are going to take you to the promised land. You are our brothers and sisters. We're going to free you from the oppression of Egypt, Mitzrayim. We're going to go to Eretz Yisrael. Do you remember how they respond initially? They say, in effect, go away, old men. Stop annoying us. We've got all this work to get done, or they'll whip us. And Rashi there, on the spot, comments, he says that they actually are responding with shortness of breath. I can't remember the exact terminology, but koshi ruach or something like that. In other words, their breathing was shallow. Their breathing was fast. Their breathing betrayed what was happening in their interpretation of the moment and the emotions. So we'll have a little breath exercise first up. And then I'm going to introduce a second exercise based on visualization to be able to give you a sense of inner security. Because anger is always a product of insecurity. It's a cover-up. It's a pretense. I blow myself up with body and sound because I want to compensate for what I'm afraid really within. So I'm going to give you an exercise that gives you a natural state of security. Okay. By the way, let me just introduce it before I do it, because it's very interesting that in the 60s and 70s, most of the rabbis forbade the practice of meditation. Why? Because some very enterprising Hindu gurus made their way across from the east to the west and introduced their formats of meditation, which became very popular and unfortunately had many elements of avodah zarah, idol worship. And therefore the rabbis feared what would be the danger for the Jewish soul under those circumstances, a topic we can discuss another time. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1979 gave a very, very famous discourse in which he said, and these weren't the Rebbe's words, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. In other words, there is merit in meditation. Get rid of the avodah zarah and utilize it for the benefit that you can. And there are two primary goals of Jewish meditation today. One, the mitzvah of health and wellness, which is an equal mitzvah to any other mitzvah, kashrus, Shabbos, health and wellness, and therefore we can overcome stress and worry and anxiety, overcome anger, because we have clear statistics that say that people who are habitually angry get sicker more often and more seriously. So it's a mitzvah to get rid of anger, in fact. So that's one of the things that we practice meditation. But the other one is insight, wisdom. Like Chabad Hasidim before davening, before prayer, would study a maimer, a wisdom teaching of one of the Rebbes, and would then take one particular inyan, one particular point, and meditate, focus on it, to internalize it so that your behavior during the day would be an expression of that wisdom. They're the two formats that are advocated, or goals that are advocated. Okay, wherever you are, sit comfortably in your chair, your hands resting on your knees and thighs, your feet positioned symmetrically on the ground, your back fairly straight, your head well balanced on your shoulders, and gently close your eyes. And just focus on your breath, gently breathing in and breathing out, just naturally. Follow your breath. See where it goes. See where it comes out. And if you can, I want you to try to breathe in and out through your nose. Take a deep, slow breath into your nose and a deep, slow breath out. And as you do, become aware of the difference in temperature of the air entering the nasal passages compared to the temperature of the air leaving the nose. And you will note that the air entering is slightly cooler and the air exiting is slightly warmer. Just focus on that temperature differential as you breathe in and out through your nose, slowly and deeply. And with your next breaths in, direct the air down to your abdomen. And you achieve that as you breathe in, expand your abdomen, your tummy, your stomach, collecting the air there. And then pull your abdomen in to expel the air. As you breathe in, expand your abdomen, giving space for the air to reach there, and then pull it in to push the air out. This is a little counterintuitive, so you need to practice it. And the trick is to expand your abdomen as you breathe in. So take a slow, deep breath in, expanding your abdomen, collecting the air, and now pulling it in to expel the air. Practice it for 2 or 3 breaths. Expanding your abdomen as you breathe in. And now let's lend some rhythm to the breathing. We're going to breathe in for a count of 3, hold for a count of 3, and breathe out for a count of 4. So take a slow, deep breath in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4. Abdominally, in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4. And just continue breathing rhythmically, abdominally, gracefully, smoothly, a perfect circle. And become aware of how relaxed you have become in the space of a few short minutes, simply by focusing on your breath. Everything breathes. God's breath breathes life into the universe. The result is night and day. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. The petals open, the petals close. Everything breathes in and out. Hashem's breath, creating life in the universe. And feeling the sense of inner balance, inner harmony, inner peace. Let's segue to the second part of this exercise. Feeling security. I want you to imagine a light source in the center of your head that emanates a glow, a light in the center of your head, pleasant glow, warmth. That light glow is the entry of your neshama into your body. Feel that glow expanding throughout your head and face. Gentle warmth and light. Intensify that glow so that it begins to spread downwards through your neck, into your torso, your chest and back. Feel the light spreading from your head down into your chest area, feeling warm and feeling the light. And now intensify that glow even more so that it spreads through your upper limbs, shoulders, arms, wrists, hands, fingers. Feel that warmth, feel that glow from the center of your head, spreading through your upper body and upper limbs. Intensify the glow even further so that now it spreads to your lower limbs. Feel the glow and warmth through your thighs, legs, feet, toes. Your whole body feels the glow of your neshama, pleasant and warm. Intensify it further from the head so that it now expresses through your skin around your body, creating a glow all around you, an aura surrounding you. That aura we call Magen Avraham, Abraham's shield, which protects you at all times, spiritually and tangibly. See that aura all around you, glowing from your skin, the Magen Avraham that protects you, keeps you secure, like a mezuzah. The way to activate the protection is to become aware of it. Be conscious of it. Be conscious of the glow of your neshama expressing around your body. And now allow that glow, that aura, to spread further, encompassing everyone in your home, protecting them as well. And even further, allowing your aura to spread into the world, adding to goodness and your personal contribution through the aura around you. And feel yourself safe and secure. Spend a few moments enjoying both the inner peace and the sense of security, and allow yourself to take it with you long after we finish this exercise. Focus again on your breath, breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Once again, become aware of the difference in temperature, cooler air entering, warmer air exiting. Begin moving your fingers and your toes in the room, wherever you are. Move your fingers now, move your toes. And when you feel ready, gently open your eyes, coming all the way back here to our session. Well, remember that doing something like this once or twice might be just interesting. But in order to make it become you, it has to be repeated over and over again to undo the habitual self and to reintroduce your conscious self. Anger is often simply a default defense mechanism based on fear. You can transform it. You can transform it by practicing to be a compassionate, understanding individual, recognizing when people seek to provoke you, it means they have the problem and you need to deal with it. The reason why they're angry with you at this moment is because Hashem entrusted you to be their best therapist in the moment. So be a proper therapist. Ensure that you can assist. And the best way to assist is to model. And when you model equanimity in the face of provocation, then under those circumstances, it leaves an important residual effect on the other person, and it helps them immensely. So with these few words, I'm going to pause because I'd like us to have an opportunity to talk to each other and compare notes. So I'm going to turn it back over now to Rabbi, but before I do, let me just note to you that I've put on the chat my email address, and if you want to receive daily short meditations every day of up to 3 minutes, not longer, you'll have to email me your cell number because they come on WhatsApp. And if you are interested and email me your cell number, I'll put you on the WhatsApp list, on the WhatsApp group, but you must put in your contacts that telephone number that I've placed at the bottom of that, my chat note, because that's the number that you'll be receiving from. And if you don't have it in your chat contacts, it won't reach you. Okay, Rabbi, let me turn it back to you.
So I'm going to take over. Thank you, Rabbi. That was quite
Robertson.
Shavua Tov to everyone. And like Rabbi Laibl Wolf had asked, we're going to turn this over to a question and answer. I'm sure people have a lot of questions. We are all guilty of, at times, getting angry, and knowing how to deal with it and knowing where it comes from is so helpful and healing. So we're going to, if you want to keep it private, I sent you my telephone number. You can WhatsApp me the question and I'll be the one answering the questions. Otherwise, if there's anybody that wants to raise their hand and ask the question publicly, that would be amazing. Nobody has questions?
Come on, share with me. Teach me something.
Moshe. Okay, we have here Adam Lachman. We're going to unmute Adam. You can ask your question, Adam.
So say is there ever a situation where, okay, so I'm someone, I think I have my emotions fairly under control, but is there ever a situation like theoretically?
I'm sorry, Adam, we don't hear you. You must talk very loud.
Oh, can you hear me now?
That's better.
That's fine.
So theoretically, you know, God forbid, someone had a relative who was murdered for example,
Yes.
would you have the right to be angry in that situation? Or say someone came into shul and desecrated a Torah. Isn't that something that would merit anger?
I may have said at the introduction, and if I didn't, then let me correct myself now. What I'm teaching is for the 99 percentile of life's ordinary circumstances. There are always exceptions, exceptional circumstances, sometimes horrific circumstances. I am the child of Holocaust survivors. My father was a yeshiva bacher when the war broke out, and he witnessed the murder of his parents and his siblings shot by a Nazi officer. He escaped, and he survived in the forests as a freedom fighter, partisan. And I know as a young man, I was very, very angry about everything, the suffering, what have you. And my father took me aside and he said, you know, if you continue just to be angry about that, the result will be you will be destroyed. You'll be the one who will suffer through life. And you're giving Hitler a posthumous victory. And that was a transition for me. And I think that's true for all the horrific circumstances. But I'm not going to deal with those two exceptional circumstances that you nominated, because that requires us to have a more profound way of responding than what time permits. So let me just say that everything that I've said is for the 99% of life circumstances when we do get angry about Narishkeiten, stupidities, silly things, people hurting us, provoking us, etc. And I'm going to reserve any discussion about horrific circumstances, which, Baruch Hashem, don't generally occur to us, thank God. And if they do, then we have to discuss them more in a deeper way. And even then, I will say the same way as my father said to me, anger is not the response. No. That doesn't mean that we should be passive. Not to be angry doesn't mean to be passive. You still have to have strong emotions. You need strong emotions to create justice in the world. You need strong emotions to create equity when there's inequity. And you have to go out and move yourself to do something about it. But that comes from compassion and empathy, wanting to help and assist, not the opposite of destroy. Because at the end, you just destroy yourself.
Thank you. Adam, I hope that helps you. I have here a question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sometimes when someone gets angry, you aren't ready to be a model. You're taken by surprise. What's the best way to respond without seeming like you are not in control?
You know, if someone suddenly asks you, you know, in 2 hours, I want you to play in Carnegie Hall in front of 5,000 people. You're going to be taken by surprise if you know piano. And you're going to start, and you'd be right. So the short answer is, this is the right time to begin practicing so that you're not taken by surprise, so that in the right moment you can do the right thing. So football teams practice many different tactics constantly so that if a circumstance should arise, they won't be surprised, they can actually respond. So the circumstance that you raise is one where perhaps there was inadequate preparation. In such circumstances that you have inadequate preparation, you haven't dedicated yourself to practice, what have you, the best thing is non-response.
So silence.
Rather than bad response. Okay, so the other one will worry or think what the hell's going on. That's all right. That's better than causing problems.
Thank you. How do you deal with a control freak with a huge ego in a working situation?
You express your love for him. Easier said than done. Remember, a control freak is a highly insecure individual. If you become understanding of what makes such a person function, and you're able to touch the inner core of that person, in Hasidus we learn that you can only sweeten the gevurot at their source. When someone is presenting their toxicity in an external way, fighting them externally doesn't help. You have to get to the core of it, and you don't know what the core of it is, but you know it comes from some point of insecurity, take my word for it, and you're gentle with them. And if you're gentle with a control freak, it completely alters their perception of the moment and the perception of the relationship. And if you're consistent, you create change. It doesn't happen immediately. It doesn't happen in that moment, but it does change because it takes only one of the two to create change for the situation to change.
Thank you. Joey, would you unmute yourself? You have a question?
Hi. How are you doing, Rabbi?
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Put up your camera so we can see you.
Okay. Okay, so my question, I mean, I once heard a shiur. It was very interesting, and I think goes along the lines of what you were saying, that emotion really starts in the mind. Yes. And the point of the shiur was that we're always one thought away, or one thought away from changing our emotion, from changing our perception of the situation. How does that align with what you were saying about?
Yes, it's a nice choice of phrase, Joe, but we're one moment away. Yes, but let's get that moment right. Emotions, in a way, start in the mind. What you've said is metaphysically correct, but for all intents and purposes, it's good to treat them as two separate flows. That mind, in fact, has an effect on our emotions and directs our emotions. So if you're asking me a question as to what do I do in that moment, that's the exercise that I gave initially in terms of the 3 steps. Now, would you like to speak just a little bit more and expand your question so I can get a better sense of the point that you're driving home?
I guess to expand a little bit, it's more just, I mean, there's not much more to expand on it. It's just because if we're one thought away from, being in a better place or seeing something a little bit better, obviously not being angry because this is the scope of the conversation. I guess that's what your answer was spot on. It's just going through the 3 steps on the moment to help ourselves get through that thought and get out of anger, maybe depression, whatever it might be.
Yeah, your nice turn of phrase, "there were one thought away," is very, very good. It's the new thought, the transformational thought. It's the thought that moves away from self-centeredness to other-centeredness. It's being able to read the situation as an opportunity rather than a threat.
Okay, I got that. And I'll credit Rabbi Jonathan Riedi for that phrase.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Here's another question. How do we know which part, it says medication, but I'm not sure if it's medication or meditation practice. I believe it's meditation practices from the East are permissible versus those that might not be. How do we know what is in the category of avodah zara versus helpful and will make us healthier?
Yes, a very important question. And the answer is you need to consult. If your knowledge quotient is insufficient, which is true for most people, then you need to consult somebody who does have that knowledge. And it's usually your local rabbi. But it's not necessarily so, because there are many rabbis today who haven't dealt in this particular arena and might themselves wish to consult before responding to you, which is a good thing. Basically speaking, I would say that in the 80s, after the Rebbe gave his public sikha, a number of medical people actually coincidentally, but it wasn't coincidence because there's always cause and effect, and there's always hashgacha pratis, created meditative techniques which were secular, devoid of any religious or spiritual connotations. Dr. Herbert Benson began the relaxation response mechanisms. There's a Dr. Ian Gawler, Gawler, whom I'm very fond of and know personally. And the use of secular-based meditations to help you in terms of stress management is probably highly, highly desirable. When it comes to insight meditation, you go to your local Chabad rabbi and learn a sikha or maimah with him and focus on a particular teaching and spend time on that focus. Now, they're the two approaches that I would recommend.
Thank you. How do you dissipate anger when someone is angry at you? How do you set boundaries when they feel you are the subject of their anger?
The expression,
should I repeat that?
No, that's fine. The expression of setting of boundaries is commonly used, and I'm not in love with the phrase. I was giving a lecture to a Fortune 500 convention in Los Angeles some years ago, and I had in the room about 100 of the most leading executives in the automotive industry. And one of the things I said to them in context of that lecture is, you know why you're so successful? It's not because you have amazing marketing departments with great PR. It's because you have taught your salespeople an important point, and that is create friendship, create a sense of closeness, indicate that you care about the people. In other words, let the boundaries blur. On the contrary, boundaries usually mean I'm going to separate myself off. And the general position in Torah and Yiddishkeit is, no, let the boundary blur. The very fact that you have somebody who is upset and angry with you, as I said earlier, is because God has sent you to help that person. That's why you are on the receiving end of their harangue. It's because Hashem trusts you to enter into the relationship and not to be separate from it. Now, so the idea of setting boundaries, I understand that, and it's a protective measure. But I think that our approach is not to protect ourselves, but to have sufficient self-confidence that we can actually transform and change the situation that needs changing.
So this goes with a question that is so pertinent, and it's one person is daring and asking that question, but we are living in COVID times. Yes. Many couples are living today at each other's necks because they've taken their work home. It's not only the couples, the kids, everybody's home. And that's when different behaviors become so blatant, things that perhaps we were able to look away from because we all left the house. Today, it's living with us, and it becomes like this monster within us. And that's another question. How do we keep the peace when we have so much tension and anger and etc. in our homes?
Yes. Okay. I empathize with the point of view. We in Melbourne, Australia have just come out of 4 months of very severe lockdown. We weren't allowed out of our homes except for 1 hour a day for shopping. All the stores were basically closed, the malls, etc. We were allowed that 1 hour for exercise and shopping. We weren't allowed to bring anyone into the house. We weren't allowed to travel more than a 20K radius to get our needs. It was severe. Today we have 0 cases of coronavirus. We've had it for over 3 weeks now, 0 cases. That's not deaths, that's 0 cases. Now, I know that in the United States, so I don't know what's in Canada, but in the United States we're up to 200,000 cases a day, and we're down to 0. So yes, there was a very severe period of lockdown, and exactly all those things you talked about of being contained within the one home, under the one roof, unexpectedly began to take its toll. It doesn't have to be. In other words, when we find ourselves cooped up with each other and we don't respond in a way which is fine and good, what a great opportunity to discover our faults. What a great opportunity to discover where I have to do work. I mean, if I truly love my wife, if I truly love my children, then surely spending more time with them should be a wonderful luxury that Hashem has afforded us in causing this set of circumstances. So if the result is the opposite, I have to introspect. I have to look into myself and ask, what is it about me? And what is it about the sensibility of my home that is abnormal? Because it's abnormal to be treated negatively by people that we love or are loved by. So there's always something that we can look for. So I don't accept the proposition that, okay, we've been cooped up and we need to separate from each other because the natural aspect of life is to be distant from each other and just to choose moments when we can come together. And then when we do that, we want the opposite. Here I am, I'm caught up in my work and I'm caught up in everything. I don't get a chance to be with my kids. I don't get a chance to be with my wife or husband, etc. So we complain at the other end. So no, I don't accept that. I know that it's happening. I'm the first one to admit that that is the case, that people are being very impatient with each other and on each other's nerves, etc. But to me, that means that we have to do a lot of growth and self-knowledge along the way, and that this is the opportunity. So I don't take it from the point of view, all right, let's practice how to tolerate each other. How do we practice to create distance from each other within the home? I take a very different point of view. My point of view is, okay, this is an opportunity to be close with my family, to be close with the ones I love. What's going wrong if I'm becoming increasingly impatient and intolerant? That is a fault, and the fault needs dealing with, not the escapism from the fault.
Okay, so what you're saying is that
it's a very intolerant approach, right?
I hope if there's any more questions, I have one question of what do you think about Tai Chi? If that's
Look, there are many,
a question.
yeah.
Okay.
We've been living in a period in history where our goodness extends to wanting to heal each other. That's a good attitude, but not always are all the healing modalities truly understood by contemporary practitioners, and not always are they expressed in the original format, nor does every potential healer have the ability to heal. Having said that as a general proviso, I personally am fairly suspicious of many contemporary forms of energy healing. And there are many different so-called formats of that. Not because there isn't some legitimacy by those who have the capacity and the ability, but most of the time it's not the case. Now, there are ancient systems that have come through, and because they work well, I think they've got a lot of here in the West, we tend to take the position, unless we can scientifically prove the cause and effect, then we're not going to touch it. I don't believe in that. I think life's experience, especially historical experience, is at least as good a teacher. And if something works, then we should be able to utilize it, whether we understand why it works or not. But it depends, again, on trust in the efficacy of the teacher as such. Tai Chi is an ancient system, an old system. I don't necessarily advocate when you do Tai Chi, you should actually study the mechanics of why it works. But on the other hand, I think Tai Chi, if it is practiced, is a wonderful tool in order to create a balance and inner peace. And I'm actually an advocate of it. But I would want to choose a teacher who doesn't introduce any Eastern teachings in it, or who tries to convince me of a philosophy of Tai Chi. And that's the same I hold for many other things, whether it's yoga, likewise, I think yoga as a body stretching and a relaxation technique is good, but no Eastern teachings, no Eastern terminology, no Eastern visuals or anything like that, used simply for the specific practical purpose in a yoga studio that's mainly secularly oriented, that's fine. That's true for a lot of things, but you have to be very, very careful that in fact there isn't any Avodah Zarah involved.
Thank you. That was very detailed. I have a question here. Going back to anger, how do you deal with a sensitive person who gets so easily offended and takes things the wrong way when you really meant nothing wrong?
The answer is you have to be much more careful, much more sensitive, much more masterful of what you say and how you say it. When you speak with a sensitive individual, you have to be more sensitive. You have to be more careful. And you can't say, oh, they took it the wrong way. If they took it the wrong way, you have given it the wrong way, and you have to take some responsibility for it.
The only way my kids take me seriously is when I get angry.
Seriously? Okay. No, that's not true. They only listen to you because you're exercising power over them. It's not that they take you seriously, it's they're frightened of you. I don't mean necessarily in frightened, but yeah, you're powerful in the moment and that cowers them into submission. Not good, not a good system. No, you'll have to find what it is that provides you with the capacity to be in a gentle manner convincing for them. And maybe if the child is young, you need to have a little bit of cause and effect stuff. That's called consequences. And by practicing consequential results is a very good way of slowly getting the child to be able to, for their own good, to practice according to your wisdom. But anger is very dangerous in parenting. I think anger creates the opposite of what you want. It's only a power game. And we know full well that in all power games, when you exercise power over someone, they eventually rebel. Whether it's parenting, the child will rebel. Whether it's international, one nation trying to exercise power over another. Sure, you can always control people for a while. At the end, there will be rebellion. And that's what's witnessed in the home as well.
Okay, I have some more questions. It could be that they're all connected. So I'll ask, this is about teenagers. What causes angry outbursts in children and in teens? Maybe the person asking the question says maybe that's too complex because it's different with every child.
Yeah.
But the response probably is different than responding to anger in adults.
Yes and no. Let's take children first. One of the features of children is that interrupted by a call. One of the features of children are that when we spoke about the two strands, the lower order self and the higher order self, the Nefesh Bahamis and the Nefesh Elokis, the highest strand doesn't come into its own till bar and bat mitzvah stage. Because it's at that stage, and this has actually physiologically been shown, that the physical brain has completed its growth process, and therefore the higher order self, which is located through the brain, is able to express only, and that's the bar and bat mitzvah. So under that age, what happens is that the lower order self is dominant. And the lower order self, the Nefesh Bahamis, is ego-centered. And that's why children always say, I want, I need, etc. Because they are naturally self-centered. You shouldn't be overly concerned by that because there's a bias in that regard. Now, teenagehood is a different stage. Teenagehood is when the young child has now moved to a position of maturity where they're learning about themselves. They're learning that they're people of conflict. They're learning about how to deal with that inner conflict of the nefesh elokis and nefesh bahamis. And they're experimenting with it. And therefore we have to be much more tolerant of their process. And if we can create an environment where they can learn for themselves best, then their growth pattern will be much, much improved. Teenagehood also has a second factor involved, and that is that while the body goes through growth spurts, it doesn't mean that their mind and emotion self has gone through a corollary growth spurt at the same time. So there's a mismatch between body and mind and emotions. So you have those years where it's we observe as a parent the young person starting to discover about themselves and coming to terms with themselves. But usually in the correct environment, they will be able to enter into a state of proper balance, A, because they come to terms with themselves, and B, because the environment that you produce for them as parents and as grandparents, which I might mention later, provides the modeling for it. And modeling is a very powerful mechanism of influence on children and grandchildren. The problem is there are many adults who actually are children in terms of maturity. They've never outgrown their childhood. They remain somehow children in adult bodies. So instead of saying, I want your train, I want your doll, and I want this, it becomes, I want your wife, and I want your money, and I want more sophisticated toys. But the same immature childhood is operating. And there you have to take very definitive approaches in order to have a quick growth process so that the adult child becomes an adult. So it really does depend, as you said earlier, but in terms of children and teenagehood, modeling would be a most important factor in their growth pattern. How you comport yourself in the face of their provocation or their searching or their pushing of the envelope, not to be frightened of it and express fear and therefore anger, but on the contrary, to show positive modeling under those circumstances as a parent. Grandparenting, one last word, very powerful. You know why grandparents and grandchildren get on so well? They have a common enemy in between. So as a consequence of that, you have a great alliance, grandparents. Use it well, because that way you can assist your own children in their battle to get their children to conform. You have a lot of power. Don't underestimate yourself.
Yeah, that was my grandfather's favorite statement. Thank you.
All right, we'll take one more.
Okay, so what causes angry outbursts? Oh no, this is, I'm sorry, this was already said. Okay. Here we are. Can you please explain the third step of how not to get angry once again? And the same person is, you answered about boundaries. And if we have a role to play to change the situation. So how do you change the situation? How do you respond to the anger in your home? So basically, the person you had the same person asked a question, and you said to create boundaries. But now, if we have a role to play to change the situation, how do you change the situation? How do you respond to the anger? So it's both questions being asked by the same person. So I guess they missed step 3 in how not to get angry. So Laibl.
I can't answer specifically because, as was pointed out by some of you, every instance requires its own micro strategization to make it work. You have to look at the personalities involved, the dynamics that are involved, etc., etc. But there are broad principles that apply. The first thing is, it's not complicated. I think a lot of psychology complicates itself. I don't think things are very complicated. If you want to go into understanding all the elemental aspects, you can complicate yourself too much. If there is a situation at the home that you would like to influence, it begins with you. To be a person of influence, you have to be a masterful individual yourself. If you change your pattern of response, the dynamics change, the relationships change. So it's not a question of trying to say, well, how can I deal with all these different factors, and I've got my husband, and I've got this child, and I've got that child, and I've got this circumstance and that circumstance. How would I? You first work on yourself, and you make yourself change. As soon as you move into a positive influence in the home by the choice of words, by the way that you express your mannerism, the tonal qualities, by the face that you present, and if all that is something which the person can read as, that is an understanding individual, that is a loving individual, that is an empathic individual, it changes the result completely in terms of the dynamics of the home. Not immediately necessarily, but yes, it will have a profound effect. The Alter Rebbe often quoted from Mishle in Sefer Tanya, saying, as a face is reflected in water, so do we reflect each other. Meaning, you create that self-persona of positivity, it'll be reflected back by every member of the family, I assure you.
Thank you so, so much. I think that this has been extremely, extremely informative to so many.
Thank you.
And we can go on all night here. I mean, for you, it's all day. There's so many questions, and this is such a pertinent subject. And we thank you for answering you with so much patience. I guess that's why you're talking about, controlling, self-control, because you have the patience to repeat and to repeat. And we thank you for that. And we thank all of you that joined us tonight. Shavua Tov. And like we said, we have 7 more sessions following every Saturday night, different sessions. We ask you to join us. And the most important thing is Hanukkah, where we have the ability to proclaim our Jewish pride. And like my husband said earlier, we are selling these menorahs that are flashing up that actually will be very attractive in your car, on top of your car. And this is the year, if you ever thought about if to buy or how to buy, this is the year that you want to go out in the streets and say, yes, I'm a Jew and I count. Because in Quebec, it seems that our voice is not counting that much, but maybe that's our fault. We need to, need to assert our positive energy, not with anger, but with light. So we're going to dispel this darkness of this exile of this galut with a lot of light, and Hanukkah is the time to do it. So we're here to help you do that, and we want to have the largest parade ever. In the car, we are for sure practicing social distancing, and even when we light the menorah, the Cavendish Mall has so graciously allotted their parking lot for all of us to be able to park while being witness to the lighting of the giant menorah in front of City Hall. Monday, December 14th, we're counting on all of you, 6 o'clock p.m. So, Shavua Tov, thank you so much, Rabbi.
A big
pleasure. Pleasure. It's wishing you a freilichen Hanukkah. May the lighting of the Hanukkah candles dispel a lot of darkness, as we know that a little bit of light pushes away a lot of darkness. And lighting the Hanukkah candles as it's getting dusk means just as it's getting dark, we're going to begin our process of creating light. We'll have no more godless. And in Yitz Hashem, our next session should take place in Yerushalayim. Please God soon.
Amen,
amen,
amen.
amen. Probably you soon, you have to go down Mincha, no? Sunday,
That's true. Okay. So everybody, those who want daily meditations, just, if you want those daily meditations, just email me yourself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very well. Good vach.
Take care.
Good vach. Shavua Tov to everyone.
Shavua Tov.